Today we're going to talk to you about tetanus in the World Wars.
Tetanus is caused by bacteria that affect the central nerve system, interfering with the release of neurotransmitter, resulting in constant contraction and seizures. The tetanus bacteria is commonly found in intestinal tract of horses and other animals, area rich in organic matter, and hot climates. Tetanus is transmitted by entering an open wound and can be fatal. The development of vaccine was challenging because the spore of bacteria is resistant to heat and the usual antiseptic. In this presentation, we hope to prove both World War had a great impact on development of tetanus vaccine. Soldiers serving in the two wars served as an important role in clinical trials of tetanus vaccine.
Now we're going to talk to you about before World War I.
About 25 years before the start of World War I, researchers started making discoveries essential to the development of the first tetanus vaccine. In 1889, Shibasaburo Kitasato isolated the bacteria and proved it caused tetanus. In 1890, Kitasato and his colleague Emil von Behring published a paper on the mechanism of immunity to diphtheria and tetanus in animals. In this paper, they describe how their studies on tetanus led to the immunization of animals such as rats, guinea pigs, and rabbits. They discuss how the blood of immunized animals carries an antitoxin and can be transferred to other animals, including animals of other species, to give immunity. This was the basis for the tetanus vaccine used in World War I. In 1897, Edmund Nocard reported success with serum therapy in curing horses suffering from tetanus and demonstrated the protective effect of passively transferred antitoxin.
Next, we're going to tell you about World War I.
During World War I, tetanus antitoxin was obtained from horses and used to immunize wounded soldiers against tetanus. Since this was a passively transferred antitoxin, immunity was not long-term and multiple doses were necessary for protection. Preventative measures were required to protect soldiers during the war, since the fighting conditions led to increased cases of tetanus. Anti-tetanus serums like the one depicted were used by soldiers during World War I. Here we see a graph of the incidence of tetanus per 1,000 wounded soldiers in British military hospitals between September 1914 and December 1916. The British Army introduced prophylactic inoculation with tetanus antiserum in October 1914. This resulted in a steep decline in the amount of wounded soldiers with tetanus. In November 1916, the War Office Committee for the Study of Tetanus issued a memo on the treatment of tetanus. It was recommended to administer a primary injection of anti-tetanus serum consisting of 500 so-called USA units and 3 milliliters of horse serum to wounded soldiers once removed from the firing line. The immunity given by the primary injection was lost in about 10 days. It was recommended to give future weekly injections of 500 units in all cases of long-lasting wounds.
Now we're going to tell you a little bit about between World War I and World War II.
In 1921, researchers found that adding formaldehyde to diphtheria toxin would destroy toxicity without destroying antigenicity. In 1923, these results were confirmed when the same method was applied to tetanus toxoid and gave similar results. In 1930, alum precipitated tetanus toxoid was developed. The resulting detoxified product was called tetanus toxoid and was used to vaccinate soldiers in World War II.
Now we're going to tell you about World War II.
During World War II, routine tetanus immunization was carried out to all active duty soldiers, and a record had to be kept. This was done by keeping paper records and by stamping the soldiers' identification tags. This immunization method was effective in preventing the contraction of the disease among the soldiers in World War II. According to Grabenstein, only 12 cases of tetanus were reported throughout World War II from all theaters of operations, despite more than 12 million Americans in uniform who incurred more than 2.7 million hospital admissions for wounds or injuries. The British Army had a different method than the U.S. Army. The British Army administered 2 doses of 1 cc toxoid 6 weeks apart and an annual booster of 1 cc single dose of 3,000 units of tetanus antitoxin was given if the soldiers were already immunized. If they were not immunized, 3,000 units were given at weekly intervals. Tetanus was not entirely prevented by active immunization. Failures were due to a low level of antitoxin at time of wounding. Fluid toxoid was used as immunizing agent for prevention against tetanus in the U.S. Army since 1941. All military personnel received 3 injections of 1 cc at 3-week intervals. A routine stimulating injection of 1 cc toxoid was administered 1 year after initial series. An emergency stimulating dose was given if a soldier was injured in a way that could cause tetanus. Studies were conducted to determine the levels of antitoxin during various stages in immunization process. 1 week after the third injection of the initial dose toxoid series, all subjects had at least the amount required for protection. Thus, there was adequate protection immediately after completion of the initial series and no need for prophylactic antitoxin. In a group of immunized soldiers who had not received injections of toxin over a period of 2 to 5 years, only 10% failed to develop a level of antitoxin that was adequate for protection. Therefore, it was considered wise to continue the administration of an emergency stimulating dose of toxoid following injury.
Now we'll compare the wars.
Here, we see a table showing the significant differences in incidences of tetanus for the wars. During World War I, the tetanus incidence per 10,000 wounded soldiers was 14.7 cases in the British Army and 1.34 cases in the U.S. Army. During World War II, the incidence per 10,000 wounded soldiers dropped to 0.6 in the British Army and 0.044 in the U.S. Army. This significant reduction of the cases of tetanus incidences between World War I and World War II supports the effectiveness of active immunization against tetanus. The United States civilian mortality rate from tetanus was approximately 20 times higher than in the U.S. Army in World War II. Data obtained from the U.S. military experience helped determine how to protect civilians. For children, it was determined that the alum precipitated toxoid would be satisfactory because it could be combined with the diphtheria toxoid. The fluid toxoid has a faster absorption rate, so it would be used for the booster dose. As you can see, the tetanus vaccine has developed throughout the world wars, and both wars allowed clinical data to determine the dosage, adjuvants, and injection schedule for tetanus vaccine. Thank you for listening. Do you guys have any questions?